Praise be Jesus Christ, and thank you for joining me for this second video going through the papal encyclical Casti Connubii. Casti Connubii means on Christian marriage. It was written in 1930 by Pope Pius XI. This second video, we're going to be going through offspring, also procreation and education. All those are, of course, together. The encyclical is broken into three sections. First, he's going to define marriage. He's going to define what is it that we're talking about here? And in this case, he's going to be very clear to define procreation, education, offspring. What is the church's intention? What is our Lord's intention with this? Then he's going to go into the attacks against procreation and education that come from, of course, Satan and the world and our own sinfulness. And then he doesn't leave us hanging. The church never leaves us hanging. We will then have the remedies to that. This is an institute, marriage, that was started by God, elevated to a sacrament by Jesus Christ. And so there's a natural order to this, that God has this order. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby and the baby carriage. And I think it's beautiful that even a simple little rhyme that maybe we all heard in elementary school, talks about offspring. It talks about babies. There's a natural order that even a young, innocent kid would know, that you have love first, you like someone, you love someone, then you get married to that person, and then you have a baby. And that's what we'll be talking about today is babies, offspring, procreation, and education of children. Section 12. It is easily seen how great a gift of divine goodness and how remarkable a fruit of marriage are children born of the omnipotent power of God through the cooperation of those bound in wedlock. So when you have two people bounded in wedlock, and you see that at the top here of the illustration, it took three things to make that bond happen. Going back to the first video, it took the will of the man to choose that woman. It took the will of the woman to choose that man. And then it took the will of the church to bond them. So three things, man, woman, church, put them in the bond in wedlock. Then it's going to take the cooperation, three things, to bring forth life. And this is beautiful because you are watching this video, you exist, and you are kept in existence because of three gifts. The gift of your father, the gift of your mother, the gift of God. So, of course, your father gives the sperm, your mother gives the egg, God gives the soul. And so these three gifts are a cooperation. That man is going to cooperate with God. That woman is going to cooperate with God. The man and woman will cooperate with each other. And this is the divine goodness. God could have brought forth life any way he went. He is all powerful. God could have brought forth humanity and continued to regenerate however he wished to do that. But how does he choose to do it? He chooses to do it within the bond of wedlock. And this is just really, as the Pope says, a remarkable fruit of marriage. And we have to see children as a fruit of marriage. Section 14. They, the married couple, share to some extent in the blessings of the primeval marriage of paradise, since it is theirs to offer their offspring to the church, in order that by this most fruitful mother of the children of God, they may be regenerated through the laver of baptism unto supernatural justice, and finally be made living members of Christ, partakers of immortal life, and heirs of that eternal glory to which we all aspire from our inmost heart. What a beautiful gift that a mother and a father, a husband and wife, can bring their precious child that has a soul but does not have grace in the soul yet. And it's very clear that this beautiful domestic church, now the mother, the father, and the child, can now bring their child to Holy Mother Church, which was given to us by Jesus Christ. And Holy Mother Church, because Christ established her to give grace and salvation to the entire world, Holy Mother Church can now offer this precious soul grace. So grace now can be in this soul. That is what Adam and Eve first enjoyed before the fall. So in a way, like the Holy Father is saying here, it is the family that returns each individual child back to the state of grace, which we enjoyed all the way back in paradise at the beginning, which is when, of course, God instituted marriage. Section 15. Both husband and wife, however, receiving these children with joy and gratitude from the hand of God, will regard them as a talent committed to their charge by God, not only to be employed for their own advantage or for that of the earthly commonwealth, but to be restored to God with interest on the day of reckoning. So again, as stated before, there's so many blessings of children in this temporal life. They are just beautiful little kids. They're full of joy. Yes, they're hard work. There's a lot of reasons why a man and a woman would want to have children. Perhaps they want a legacy. Perhaps they want to be taken care of when they're older. There's also a spiritual reason, and that would be that we get these souls to heaven. In fact, it's beautiful. And a priest one time at a wedding during his homily said that the man and the woman, would be making citizens of heaven, and that part of our job as a married couple is to make citizens, of course, of earth, to continue the race, to make citizens of the church through baptism, and then to make citizens of heaven by ultimately helping them get to heaven and have that everlasting life. And I kind of think that I hope one day, of course, that people will come up to me and say, "Oh, is that your son? You're so-and-so's dad? Thank you for your son. Thank you for your daughter." And what an honor that is for a parent. If people went up to my parents, for instance, they went up to my mom and dad and said, "Oh, you're Matt's mom and dad? You're Matt's mom? Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for your son." How much more so, it's just such a moment of pride, but how much more so would it be great for Jesus to say that to me or to my wife? Thank you for giving me this citizen. That's Jesus. Jesus saying to a parent, "Thank you for giving me your child." And that really is the greatest honor. That is the greatest reason to have children, is that they can get to heaven. They can be with Jesus forever because Jesus loves them so much. What did Jesus say? "Let the little children come to me." In fact, if you read Matthew 19, you read the beautiful things that Jesus says in Matthew 19, which is one of the readings for marriages, the gospel. When you continue to read, right after talking about marriage, he talks about celibacy, talks about holy orders, and then right after talking about that, he talks about children. And he says, "Let the little children come to me." So to me, that is not accidental. I think what's happening there, of course, is that marriage is to help physical life, perpetuate physical life, and help get that physical life, those children, to heaven, so that we can really obey the command of Jesus, "Let the little children come to me." And we want to be generous with that. We want many children, many, many, many children to come to Jesus. What is the purpose of the celibate priesthood? Is to give spiritual life to these beautiful children and to help the children get to Jesus. Same thing with the religious life. So marriage and celibacy work hand in hand. What are the purpose of those two? It's to get souls to heaven, to make citizens of heaven. So I think it's beautiful. So read that in Matthew 19. Now I want to just focus on what the Pope says here. I think he gives a beautiful connection to Scripture, Matthew 25:14 through 30, in that the couple here can regard their children as these talents that have been given by God. In other words, your child, yes, is your child, but it's not your child alone. It comes from God. Just like your body is not your own. Your body, one time someone said, your body is on loan. In other words, I'm loaning my body from God. I will have to answer, what have I done with my body? What good have I done with my body? What evil have I done with my body? My children are not my own. Yes, they are my children, but they are not mine only. They belong to my wife. They belong to their siblings. They belong to society. But most importantly, they belong to God, because they wouldn't be here without God. God is the one that enabled them to come in by giving them a soul, giving them life at the moment of conception. So truly, each and every child is this talent. But I want you to think of something just real quick with this in regards to the gift of fertility. Let's say that a man and a woman get married at age 25, that she goes through menopause at 45. So there are, let's say, 20 years there, 25 to 45. Let's say in that window of 20 years, she could have a child every 2 years, which would be 10 kids. Now, at first, especially to our modern ear, that sounds crazy. 10 kids? Oh my gosh, how will I handle 10 kids? If you look at your own family, I encourage you to try to do a family tree over the past 100 years. So here I have an example of my family tree. My son, Sebastian, who is my firstborn, has 6 siblings. I only have 2 siblings. When was I born? I was born in 1975. Then, and then you have my mom, who was I think born in around the 50s or so, and she has 6 siblings. Her dad, my grandpa, 6 siblings. My great-grandpa, Arthur Nicholas, who actually was first generation American from Germany, 6 siblings. So it's pretty cool that in my family, there's a consistency. I don't know if this is a genetic thing. I don't know what this is. My line, at least on my mom's side, have typically had 7 kids. You will also notice you probably know some families that have 8 kids or 6 kids. So it was not uncommon, especially in generations past, that people would have 8 or 10 kids. Why is that? Why was that happening? Well, it was happening because it's part of the natural order. If you have fertility for 20 years, you're going to probably have 10 kids. If you're fertile for 30 years, you could possibly have 12 to 15 kids. So this is actually the natural order of how fertility works. One of the attacks against this is people are marrying later in life. So let's say someone gets married at the age of 30 or even 28. Let's just pick 28. Let's say someone gets married at 28 and then they delay. They want to wait 2 years to have a child. So they purposely don't have a child for 2 years. Then at 30, they have a child. At 35, the world's going to tell them you're too old to have children now. Because at 35, everyone starts saying, oh, you're too old. There's going to have problems with your children, Down syndrome, this, that, or the other, right? So what is that woman faced with now? She's faced with pretty much being bullied in a sense and told that she only has 5 years of fertility. Okay, well, if you only have 5 years of fertility, you're probably just going to have 2 kids. And then on that second kid, someone at the hospital would say, do you want to have a hysterectomy? You're getting a little bit old. And unfortunately, the world does not see children as a blessing, and they want to severely limit the number of children, which in this parable would be the number of talents. So what happens to the man in the parable that is only given 1 talent and he buries it? He doesn't multiply it. He is reprimanded. However, those that are given talent and they multiply it, whether it be 10 or whether it be 4, they are told that they are good servants. And so with this, what the Pope is saying is we need to regard children as talents. We need to multiply. We need to be fertile and multiply. And we need to use fertility in the natural order and not listen, not suppress it, and not listen to the lies that are told to us in society. But see blessings, see the children as truly the blessings that they are, as given from God. In fact, in the wedding ceremony, the couple is asked, will you willingly receive children from God? That is something that they will say yes to. That is something that definitely a married couple needs to be willing to really say yes to. Yes, I will receive children willingly from God. Pope Pius is going to now quote St. Augustine. St. Augustine says, as regards the offspring, it is provided that they should be begotten lovingly and educated religiously. So this is where we get procreation and education, the beautiful gift of self bearing fruit through these children. And so the offspring are the overflow of this love of the couple. And then the education part, you just don't have children, but you also want to educate them. How? Religiously. Bring them to the church, put them in catechism classes, prepare them for the sacraments so that they have every single grace and means necessary to get to heaven, which is the final goal. The Pope's going to quote the 1917 Code of Canon Law. The primary purpose of marriage is the procreation and education of offspring. The secondary purpose is mutual assistance and the remedy of concupiscence. So it here gives you a clear hierarchy. Primary purpose, secondary purpose. If you look at the boxes below, which we talked about in the first video, these are the blessings. Remember, St. Augustine talks about the 3 blessings of marriage. That would be procreation and education, which he calls offspring. mutual assistance, which Augustine calls conjugal fidelity, and then the sacrament, which is the third piece there. What is the primary piece here? The primary purpose of marriage is procreation, education. It is offspring. Secondary is the mutual support, the mutual assistance of the couple. There also, he now adds, or the Code of Canon Law adds, this remedy of concupiscence. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Concupiscence is our desire, our lean towards sin because of the original sin. Many times we think about the remedy of concupiscence being able to control lust, because a man or a woman isn't just going to go out and have that disordered desire for the sexual act, but rather order it towards their spouse and their spouse only, and also towards offspring. The church order is very clear here. First, offspring. Second, mutual assistance. Those two things have to be there. We talked about in the first video, if those two things are not intended, St. Thomas Aquinas says it is not a true marriage. So you do have to intend offspring. In fact, sometimes people say, how will I know if I'm ready to get married? You could first ask, are you ready to have children? If you are not ready to have children, then you are not ready for marriage. I know that kind of sounds like, whoa, but if the purpose of marriage is children, then don't get married if you're not ready to have children. In our society, we have this, I'm going to kind of go here into maybe a little bit of the attacks as well, but in our society, it seems like there are steps. And you can see this in conversation. You can also see this in sitcoms and movies. There seems to be a hierarchy in our world. And that hierarchy is that two people need to prove that they love each other. Two people need to say, we are an item. We are together. I need to prove this to you. And so what does a man do to show a woman, hey, I'm for real. I'm the one. Well, maybe the first thing when they're dating is that moment they say, I love you for the first time. And, sometimes that can be a really big moment. You look at someone and you say, I love you. And then you think, oh my gosh, did I just say that? Because that's a big commitment when someone says, I love you. It's not just, hey, I like hanging out with you, or you're friendly. I love you. That's a big step. And that's typically the first step. In our society, the second step is, well, I really like you. I really love you. I'm going to prove that with my body and have sex with you. The second step, unfortunately, in our society, many times is a physical commitment, and that physical commitment leads to the sexual act. Then they said, I love you. In other words, they're saying that often, I love you. They're now sexually active. And then they say, well, let's move in. Let's have a home together, because that seems to be now, we're going a little bit deeper now. I said I love you. I'm having sex with you. I'm going to now live with you. I'm going to show you that I love you, and I'm going to live with you. And then, hey, we're living together, and this seems to be kind of nice, test-driven things, and seems like it's working. Hey, let's just get married. Let's do this. Maybe we do this at the court. Maybe we do this with the church, but let's just get married. And then, wow, this marriage is kind of working out. I think we could probably bring kids into this situation. So my final kind of statement is, I love you, is to have a child with you. And you'll notice that each one of these is just a little bit more like, if you're playing poker, you're putting a little bit more money in. You're putting more chips on the table. It doesn't say much to say I love you. Okay, that's pretty easy. But to then give your body to someone, that's a little bit more commitment. To live with someone, definitely a commitment. To marry someone, that's a commitment that is now on a third party recognizing. And then when you bring another life into this world, you are definitely saying, like, yeah, I'm kind of tied to you now. That seems to be the progression of our society. Our Lord and the church has a totally different progression. And it's not kind of testing the water as if you're getting just, now I'm going like one foot into the water, 2 feet into the water, 3 feet in the water. Okay, now I'm all in. It's not like that at all. In fact, the order for marriage within the church, and actually the order of God, is that you say that you truly love someone. And yes, you can say, I love you. That's still the first step. And then you think, you know what? I would want to have a child with this person. I would want to have a family with this person. I want to have many children. I want to grow old with this person, and I want to have kids and grandkids. That's what I want. And I want it with this person. So then, of course, well, how do people have kids? Well, they get married. They get married, and then they live with each other, and then they have sex. So it's kind of like, I love you, and then a discernment, and I want to have a family with you. I want to have children with you. Okay, so now that I know I want to have children with you, and I could definitely do that and see that and want that, then I'm going to do three things. And I'm going to marry you, and then I'm going to enjoy the rights of marriage. So I'm going to marry you, permanent bond, and then I'm going to enjoy the rights of marriage with you, living with you, having sex with you. And then, of course, then from that sex, God willing, comes the offspring, the child that you intentionally wanted. And I want to, especially too, if you're preparing for marriage, really challenge you for that. If you're dating someone, challenge you to that. You know, in other words, do not move to the level of cohabitation, sexual intercourse, marriage. Do not move to that level if you do not want to have a child with this person. And if you do want to have a child with this person, then marry that person and get on with business. Go ahead and get everything going, move. Because in our day and age, we don't know. Are people infertile? We don't know what will happen. And so basically, if you want to have a family with this person and you want to be with this person forever, then marry them and then do what married people do. Do it joyfully, do it lovingly, and do it until the day you die. When I started doing marriage prep about 5 years ago, I asked a priest that I've known for quite a while. He asked me how things were going at the parish, and I told him that I'm doing marriage prep. And I said, do you have any advice for me? He said, yes, I do. I have one thing, one word of advice. Let every single couple know that divorce and contraception are non-negotiables. No divorce, no contraception. And I valued that from that priest, and I have used that every time. And that's why, you know, I'm definitely stressing it in these videos. But it's not just because that priest said it, it's because it's true. That priest has said it because the church says it. And the church here is clearly saying it through the Holy Father, Pius XI. So now we'll go into these attacks as Pope Pius XI articulates this for us. If you go back to that St. Augustine quote, remember he said that children should be begotten lovingly. One of the greatest joys that I think a couple can have is that when they are together in the sexual union, the marital act, that they are thinking in the back of their head, this could bring forth life. What a great joy. What a great joy to be with the one you love. You know, that husband and wife that are together and they're thinking what we're doing right now could bring a life, could bring a body and a soul into existence. I remember speaking to a friend and he said, I would hate to be with my wife and in the back of my mind thinking, I hope we don't conceive. It's very similar to if you were to see a farmer out in his field and let's say it's time to plant seeds. It's a great weather. There's going to be rain coming and sunshine. Everything's great. The environment is right. And you see dark soil, it's tilled, it's beautiful. And you see that the farmer is going to put down a big blue tarp, maybe like you see at a baseball field, you know, when it's about to rain, big blue tarp. And he just puts it over, you know, just tons of acres of his land. So maybe 5 acres of farmland, big blue tarp covering all 5 acres. And then you're like, what is he doing? And then you see him start throwing seed down on the plastic tarp. And you're like, it just seems crazy. You're like, what is this farmer doing? This is not a good farmer. Nothing is going to bear fruit. Section 53, the Pope's going to go right into this contraceptive mentality. First consideration is due to the offspring, which many have the boldness to call the disagreeable burden of matrimony, and which they say is to be carefully avoided by married people, not through virtuous continence, which Christian law permits in matrimony when both parties consent, but by frustrating the marriage act. Such a good section, because he says we first need to consider offspring. Because offspring is the primary purpose, then we first need to consider how is offspring seen by this man and this woman. Many people, of course, this is the lies of the world coming in, but this also creeps into some of the people in the church, would be that that offspring are just a disagreeable burden. You know, that word that he uses is so perfect. Remember, this was written 100 years ago. Children are a disagreeable burden. Oh, children are hard. Oh, children are expensive. Oh, we need time to be selfish and just be with me and my spouse before we bring in these kids. And all of those things are really saying one thing. They're a disagreeable burden. They're going to be a burden on my life. Maybe I'll have one or two just because it's kind of nice, maybe, but ultimately it's just a disagreeable burden of matrimony. So instead of seeing this as the primary purpose and the benefit and the fruit of matrimony, it now becomes a disagreeable burden of matrimony, which then should be carefully avoided, planned out, strategically planned, all of these things. And the problem here is when the children are carefully avoided by frustrating the marriage act. And what would be and I like this word frustration because it's perfect use. What contraception is simply put, is it frustrates the marriage act. It frustrates intercourse. It is, if it's not trying to directly prevent the sperm and egg from meeting, then it's trying to make that difficult. So if you see the diagram here, the sexual act, once man and woman are in a bond, then the next thing that comes forth from that, if you remember Genesis 1, I think 27, 28, God made man and woman. He put them in the bond, and then he said, be fertile and multiply. So the next very thing that he does is it kind of introduces, of course, the sexual act, because a man has a certain body part, the penis, the woman has a certain body part, the vagina. When those two things come together, the man and the woman come together, those body parts come together, that is a complete sexual act. What does contraception do? It frustrates that act. It's going to frustrate the act itself, but maybe by not a complete action, or it's going to try to prevent the sperm and the egg from meeting. And so that is what contraception does. It's a frustration of the act. Now, it is obviously permissible, as he says, by the church to practice continence. In other words, a man and a woman do not always have to be together. They do need to love each other. They do need to be together in the sexual act, but the church doesn't tell them how often they need to be together. And so you can obviously practice continence within a marriage. This would be by mutual consent. In fact, if you want to read Paul, 1 Corinthians 7, he kind of outlines this, that a man and a woman can refrain from the sexual act. That's called continence. They can do that, they should do that by mutual consent. But also they need to return back to each other. It needs to be a period of time, but they need to return back to each other. So that, of course, is allowed. What is not allowed is frustrating the marital act. You can abstain from the marital act, but you can't frustrate the marital act. Because of this disagreeable burden, seeing children as a disagreeable burden, I have heard recently, a few couples have told me that in society there is now a thing called DINK, D-I-N-K. And this kind of proves the point of where our culture is and how many times people see children as a disagreeable burden. Some people even go further and don't want children at all. In other words, they want marriage, they want sex, but they do not want children. And that's what DINK is. So DINK is dual income, no children. Dual income, no kids, no children. I want to propose silk. And that would be single income, lots of kids. So lots of children. Single income, lots of kids. So you can see a difference here between the world and the kingdom of God, the church, that we want to have an openness to life. This is directly in the vows. Will you receive children openly from God and lovingly from God? Section 54, since therefore the conjugal act is destined primarily by nature for the begetting of children, those who in exercising it deliberately frustrate its natural power and purpose sin against nature and commit a deed which is shameful and intrinsically vicious. The Pope is being very clear here. When any form of contraception is used, any form, and even the mentality of it, but particularly when you're deliberately frustrating the act, you are frustrating the natural power and the purpose. And this is a sin against nature, and it is an intrinsically vicious act. My understanding historically with the context of this encyclical is that Pope Pius XI was writing this in response to the Episcopal Church, who had just opened up contraception to their entire congregation. So in the 1930s, the question was, are religious groups going to use contraception or not? And I believe it was the Lambert Conference. The Episcopal Church had held a conference called the Lambert Conference. At that conference, they said that contraception can be up to the couple. In other words, if the couple wants to use contraception, okay. Of course, then people immediately see that the Episcopal Church did this. Then they look to the Catholic Church. What are you going to do, Catholic Church? And namely Pius the 11th. What are you going to do? You're the Pope. What's your decision? Are Catholics allowed to do the same thing that now Episcopals are doing? And this is part of this encyclical is his response to that. Now, Pope Paul VI will make another response in the 60s because people continue to push the issue. The issue is answered here. Paul VI has to answer it further, but really everything we need to know about contraception, well, I think it's already been said, but the Pope Pius XI is reiterating our teaching on contraception here. In section 55, which we'll get to in just a second, Pius XI is going to talk about the sin of onanism, and we'll read that in just a second. But onanism is, in other words, masturbation. The sin of masturbation used to be called onanism. So I want to talk about what we know as masturbation. This would be the spilling of the seed. So I do want to stress what is the church's teaching on masturbation. This goes to 1975, so it's just written a little bit after, 45 years after Casti Connubii. This is during the time of Paul VI. He signs off on this document called Persona Humana. In fact, both the magisterium of the church, in the course of a constant tradition, and the moral sense of the faithful have declared without hesitation that masturbation is an intrinsically and serious disordered act. The main reason is that whatever the motive for acting this way, the deliberate use of the sexual faculty outside normal conjugal relations essentially contradicts the finality of the faculty. So you could also kind of, rephrase this to say that the deliberate use of the sexual faculty, what is that? That's the penis and the vagina. The deliberate use of the penis and the vagina outside of marriage, for whatever reason, outside of the conjugal relations, outside of the marital act, for whatever reason, is contrary to its purpose. What is the purpose of the sexual act? We've been saying it: offspring, procreation. I like to tell, especially those going through confirmation, teenagers, I like to kind of say 5 things. I think this is important advice for any young person, but it also applies to older people as well. And that would be that follow these 5 rules, and you're going to be pure. You are definitely going to practice purity and chastity according to your state in life if you follow these 5 rules. Don't arouse yourself. Don't arouse anyone else. Don't allow anyone else to arouse you. Make sure the sexual act is complete and within a marriage. Make sure that marriage is within the church. So here in section 55, the Pope is going to quote St. Augustine. And again, we talked about masturbation. Masturbation used to be called onanism. It also was given the title self-abuse. Sometimes when we change the language of things, in our mind, it changes the meaning of things, or we don't know what it really means. When you call a sin self-abuse, then it kind of course, is like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't do that, right? If you call something onanism, if you say don't commit the sin of onanism, then probably the question would be, what is onanism? And then you can tell someone the story of Onan. I think because we call masturbation, we don't know, what does that mean? But if you call it self-abuse or onanism, it leads to something else. So now I want to lead to, who is Onan, and why did we call this sin, or why can we call this sin onanism? Chapter 38 of Genesis. I'm going to read it a little bit here, and hopefully it'll kind of make sense. This is the line of Judah. So if you remember Abraham, Isaac, Jacob had 12 sons. Judah is one of those sons. This is going to be the line of Judah here, which also is the line of Jesus. Jesus is in this line of Judah. At that time, Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Aldamite named Hiras. And he saw there the daughter of a man of Cana called Sue. And taking her to wife, he went into her. So when it says he went into her, that's the sexual act. And she conceived and bore a son and called his name Her. And conceiving again, she bore a son and called him Onan. She bore also a third, whom she called Selah, after whose birth she ceased to bear any more. And Judah took a wife for her, his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Her, the firstborn of Judah, was wicked in the sight of the Lord and was slain by him. So what we have here is that Judah's son was married to Tamar. So son number 1 of Judah was married to Tamar. Son number 1 dies. It is now the obligation of son number 2, who is Onan, to marry Tamar and to have children with Tamar. And that's where this part now leads into. Judah therefore said to Onan, so the father is saying to the second son, Judah said to Onan his son, go into thy brother's wife and marry her, that thou may raise seed to thy brother. So the dad says this to Onan, the second son, you need to marry and have sex with Tamar, your brother's wife. This is right and just. This is the law. And then those children would be, in a sense, credited as your brother's children. So you're taking care of your brother and honoring him, and also his wife. This is Onan, he, knowing that the children should not be his, when he went into his brother's wife, spilled his seed upon the ground, lest children should be born in his brother's name. And therefore the Lord slew him, because he did a detestable thing. So this is in Scripture. You cannot spill your seed. You cannot spill your seed through self-abuse. You cannot allow another person to spill your seed, and you cannot enter into the conjugal act, intercourse, pulling out and spilling your seed. The spilling of seed is a wicked act, as it says in Scripture, as St. Augustine says, and it is an unlawful act because it acts in disagreement and disorder with nature. Pope will continue in section 56. Our mouth proclaims anew. Now, when he says the pronoun "our" here, he's speaking of the popes. So his job as a pope is to reiterate what the church has always taught, and so he's leaning in here, doubling down, tripling down. He's with full force. He's saying, hey, I want to be clear here as the Pope what the church teaches. Our mouth proclaims anew any use whatsoever of matrimony exercised in such a way that the act, as the sexual act here, is deliberately frustrated in its natural power to generate life is an offense against the law of God and of nature, and those who indulge in such are branded with the guilt of grave sin. This is a serious sin. It's a mortal sin, which means that grace, if grace is in the soul, now grace is forfeited. Grace is lost. Obviously, the Pope is having to stress this because people don't know it or they're ignoring it. So this is why the Pope continually, and the church will always do this. Priests, bishops, popes, lay people, the church will have to continue to proclaim anew. Why would the church have to proclaim something again and again and again and again and again? Either there's ignorance and people honestly don't know, or people are indifferent, or people don't want to know. So it's the job of the church to continue to proclaim anew the truths of the gospel and how these truths are attacked. In this case, the truths of marriage and sex and how marriage and sex are being attacked. Section 59. For in matrimony, as well as in the use of the matrimonial rites, there are also secondary ends, such as mutual aid, the cultivating of mutual love, and the quieting of concupiscence, which husband and wife are not forbidden to consider so long as they are subordinated to the primary end, and so long as the intrinsic nature of the act is preserved. This is beautiful. I don't want to talk too much. I could talk a lot about this, but I'm going to try to be brief on this one, is that, someone could say up to this point, so you're just saying that sex is just for children? That's the primary purpose. Are there other, obviously, ends to the sexual act? Of course. And the Pope is saying that right here in section 59. There are secondary ends, but those secondary ends need to be subordinated under the primary end. What about when a couple is infertile? They actually are not able to have children. What about when a couple enters into menopause? So does that mean that the sexual act for them is nothing, just because it doesn't have the primary end? Not at all, because there are secondary ends of the sexual act. The Pope lists those beautifully here. Mutual aid. In other words, you're loving each other. You're mutually giving of yourself. You're saying, this is my body. Again, if you want to read this, it's beautiful. St. Paul talks about it, 1 Corinthians 7, that the man gives his body to his wife, the woman gives her body to that giving of self. I think John Paul talked about it as the gift of self, the marital embrace, that aid, that help. Cultivating mutual love kind of goes along, that bond that happens, that connection that only those two people can have, that intimacy. Quieting concupiscence. Of course, there is the tendency to have the desire for the sexual act disordered, and that can be through whatever lustful thoughts, adultery, pornography, all kinds of stuff that can really pervert a marital relationship. And so that sexual act between just that man and that woman can definitely quiet and correctly order that desire. So all of these things are not forbidden by the church, but they are secondary, and that's important. And then even within the sexual act, not only do they need to be those things need to be considered secondary to the primary end, but also they need to be done in a way that the act is preserved. In other words, it's according to nature. It needs to be respectful, and according to the sexual act, according to as God intended. And of course, this kind of goes back to the contraception mentality. God did not intend that for the sexual act. I guess the best way you can think of this is that the sexual act needs to be a complete sexual act that is respectful, dignified as God intended, respecting the couple, respecting God. So the state does have a role, but the state also can either act positively or negatively. And the Pope is saying here what a government should do in regards to offspring. Those who hold the reins of government should not forget that it is the duty of public authority by appropriate laws and sanctions to defend the lives of the innocent. One of the primary duties of the state, the government, is to defend innocent life. And this all the more so since those whose lives are endangered and assailed cannot defend themselves. We talk about the unborn as being defenseless. They have no voice. They can't defend themselves. Among whom we must mention in the first place infants hidden in their mother's womb. I love this terminology, infants hidden in their mother's womb. Because they're hidden, because they have no voice, they definitely need to be protected. They are the most vulnerable in our society, and so they need to be protected by this massive authority of a government or a state that does have the power to protect them and should protect them. What, therefore, is the response of the government? Unfortunately, in America, we have seen lots of negative response in this regard. So one of the most blatant responses of our government towards those infants hidden in their mother's womb is seen in the Planned Parenthood versus Casti case. So here, this is in 1992. I don't know if it's Sandra Day O'Connor or some of the others. I believe she wrote this, but if she didn't directly write it, it's definitely in the court case. You can look it up. So in 1992, our Supreme Court said this: people have organized intimate relationships and made choices that define their views of themselves and their places in society, in reliance on the availability of abortion, in the event that contraception should fail. This tells a lot, a whole lot. How many times do you see the pronoun their? Their views, their places. People have organized intimate relationships and made choices that define their views of themselves and their places. In other words, me. The unholy trinity, me, myself, and I. Because I want to choose what relationships I have, with whom, and how, and as many, because I want to make choices that define myself and my view and my status or place in society. And this is particularly talking about women who want to enjoy the sexual act, or men that want to use women to enjoy the sexual act, but they don't want that, what we talked about earlier, that burden of life. So I want to have whatever relationship I want, whenever I want, and I want to keep my status in society, but I don't want to be burdened by a child, because that may then disrupt my place, my definition of who I am, my choices, and my relationship. And think about that just in a second. This precious new life, a body, a soul given by God, intended by God, that comes into existence, that will never go out of existence, that this precious little child is the one that is disrupting my place in society, disrupting how I define myself, disrupting my choices and my relationships. And so we can't have this. And so we then need to have the reliance. It's saying clearly here, we need to rely on abortion. We need to rely on abortion. We must be able to attack that child hidden in their mother's womb. We're not going to protect it. We're going to get rid of it if it's there. We don't want it there. In fact, it says right here, we will get rid of it in the event that contraception should fail. So there's a two-point plan here. And this is Satan's plan. First and foremost, if you see the graphic here, we don't want sperm to get to the egg. We do not want the sperm and the egg to meet. So therefore, we want the penis and the vagina to be together. We want that to happen. But we don't want the sperm and egg to meet. So we're going to do all forms of contraception that we already mentioned. If, however, the contraception should fail, we have to do something about that pesky little life that's disrupting so many things. And that's a burden to me, my partner, my status, my life, society, whatever you want to put there. And so we must have abortion. In section 70, here the Pope's going to talk about not just contraception, not just abortion, but here now sterilization. So, we've seen in our time, this is after the 1930s, but, China had a one-child policy and enforced that. After one child, you had a forced sterilization. I personally have known people that are Chinese that have come into the Catholic Church. One particular lady that became Catholic, her grandparents actually, because she was a girl and because the family was only allowed one child, her own grandparents wanted to take her out into the forest and leave her. Her parents said no, and they kept her. She now is Catholic, but she has no siblings. She was denied siblings. She almost lost her very life at the hands of her grandparents because of this one-child policy and this forced sterilization. So with this being said, the Pope is also going to address this sterilization and the overreach that a government can have. Public magistrates have no direct power over the bodies of their subjects. Therefore, where no crime has taken place and there is no cause present for grave punishment, they, the government, can never directly harm or tamper with the integrity of the body, either for the reasons of eugenics or for any other reason. Stressing here, any other reason. Well, population control, any other reason. Blah, 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 blah. Any other reason. It doesn't matter. The Pope here has said, a government does not have, they're not all powerful, and they do not have power over the bodies of their subjects. Very important. And so just want to throw that in as far as sterilization is concerned, that the Pope is also talking about that. He's now going to go not just from what the government, what the power of the government, but he's also now going to go to the individual. Now, this is very, very controversial in a sense, or hot button, because what do we say? What's the claim now in America? My body, my choice. My body, my choice. My body, I can do with whatever I want with my body. And here, the Holy Father here is going to say, private individuals have no other power over the members of their bodies than that which pertains to their natural ends. So beautiful here. I, Matt Gill, I do not have the power to do whatever I want with my own body. I do not have the power to do with my body something that is contrary to its natural end. So that's when you look at the body parts of the penis and the vagina, you say, what are their natural ends? Intercourse, procreation is their natural end. In other words, I can't interfere with that through other things, self-abuse, onanism, masturbation, whatever you want to call it. And so I can't interfere with that. I also can't sterilize myself. I can't have, whatever, my tubes tied or a hysterectomy. Now there are some cases, of course, where it's a medical necessity, but that's different. Here also, we can go into the fact of what's happening now with gender ideology, where a woman declares that I want to change my body through hormones, through mutilation. I want to change my body into the body of a man. Or a man says, I want to change my body into the body of a woman. Here, what does it say? A private individual does not have the right, they are not free to destroy or mutilate their members. This was written 100 years ago, but it's happening now. People are mutilating themselves. People are declaring that I want to change my entire makeup, not just one body part, but I want to change my entire makeup through hormones or whatever. And so this has already been almost prophetic in a sense that this has already been spoken about. Now, there will be some things that the Holy Father, of course, would not know and just almost couldn't even imagine, and that would be the gender ideology stuff. But also when you get into IVF, in vitro fertilization, when you get into surrogacy and things like this. When we look at the diagram, of course, you can see very clearly here in regards to children, IVF is going to separate the complete sexual act from the actual life act, so the unitive act of the married couple, the sexual act, from the procreative act. It's going to separate that. It is going, and that's why that is wrong. So in vitro fertilization, surrogacy, contraception, abortion, all of these are attacks. And what are they all centered around? They're all centered around offspring, procreation. As I said earlier, the church, the Pope, is not going to leave us without a remedy. The church, one of the jobs of the church is to heal us, to sanctify us, to make us holy, so that we can be perfected in charity and arrive at our ultimate destination, which is heaven. Section 110. Let husband and wife resolve to stand fast to the commandments of God in all things that matrimony demands, always to render to each other the assistance of mutual love, to preserve the honor of chastity, not to lay profane hands on the stable nature of the bond, to use the rights given them by marriage in a way that will be always Christian and sacred, more especially in the first years of wedlock, so that should there be need of continency afterwards, custom will have made it easier for each to preserve it. Here, he beautiful list. I want to connect it to the diagram here. What is the first thing he says? Render to each other mutual assistance, mutual love. And that would be that last block there, mutual assistance. Stand to the laws of God and continue to love each other. Make sure you practice chastity according to your state in life. To not lay profane hands. What does he mean here? In other words, no allowance of divorce and all that, which we talked about in the first video. So here he talks about how a couple may need to be continent at times. There might be a time when a couple, a man and a woman, need to refrain from the sexual act if they are used to practicing continence at the very beginning. So what's beautiful about this, as a single person, you need to be continent anyways. You need to not be engaged in the sexual act. In fact, there it's called abstinence. But then you get engaged and you're still abstaining from the sexual act. And then you get married and of course you enter into the sexual act. But even a young married couple will have times when they are not together and that they are okay with that and that they love each other in many other different ways. And the reason the Pope says this is important to start to cultivate that. So, for instance, I have been married for almost 25 years. If my wife and I have been practicing times of continence even from the very beginning of our marriage, then practicing continence now would not be so difficult. In other words, we have mastered that. It's made us easier to persevere in it. Why would a couple not be together? Well, perhaps there is an illness happening and the couple are not able to be together. Maybe there is a job that causes the man to travel and he's not able to be with his wife for months. Okay, that is then a period of continence. So the Holy Father here is saying that it's not just the sexual act that needs to be paid attention to, but also refraining from the sexual act at times by mutual assistance. St. Paul talks about this again, 1 Corinthians 7. And if that's the case, and that is a part of the marriage, then when two people are not going to be together for whatever reason, then it's not so hard. It's understandable. It's been practiced. And that's what he's talking about here in this. Section 113. It will also help them if they behave toward their cherished offspring as God wills. That is, that the father be truly a father and the mother truly a mother. Through their devout love and unwearying care, the home, though it suffer the want and hardship of this valley of tears, may become for the children in its own way a foretaste of that paradise of delight in which the Creator placed the first men of the human race. This is central, that if you're going to be, I always feel like if you're going to be a good father, you need to be a good husband. If you're going to be a good mother, you need to be a good wife. So what can a man and a woman truly give to the offspring that they share together, that God has given them? They can be a good husband, a good wife. They can create a beautiful home, care for that home, provide and protect that home. And ultimately, then they can be the father and mother that they're intended to be. Now, Pius the 11th is writing this in 1930. Pope John Paul II is going to reinforce this sentiment in an encyclical he writes. So it's necessary to go back to seeing the family as the sanctuary of life. The family is indeed sacred. It's called the domestic church. It is the place in which life, the gift of God, can be properly welcomed and protected against the many attacks to which it is exposed, and can develop in accordance with what constitutes authentic human growth. In the face of the so-called culture of death, the family is the heart of the culture of life. So it's really interesting. The home is the bridge. The home is the bridge that takes us two ways. It takes us back to the paradise that we once had, and it takes us forward to the paradise we will have in heaven. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.